It's a Yoko satellite image. So obviously they have been here since at least 2001. And this is a soft X-ray image, which means that this object was emitting X-rays. Now, the exposure for these images is about 1 second or less. And we can actually see the contours of the object in this image. Now, a lot of people, the debunkers, have before tried to convince me that this was the moon. And I will show you that again, that this cannot be the moon. We can actually see the contours of the object through the light, the X-ray light that it's emitting. And what we see is there's more X-rays being emitted from the right hemisphere than from the left. This one is darker. There's more being emitted from the equator here, and we can actually see the contour as if there's a layer here that is thicker and above the lower layer that we see here. So it seems to be a layer, a thick layer here on the object that is emitting a bit more X-rays. And we can also see that some of the contours are circular, so we can actually see that this is a spherical object. We can see its curvature on these contours. So these are not scattered X-rays. Scattered X-rays do not give an idea of the contours of a surface. They are scattered in different directions. Unemitted X-rays can give the sort of view. So the moon does not emit X-rays because the moon is not hot enough to emit X-rays. Only a very hot object can emit X-rays. In other words, a star. So the moon does not emit X-rays, but it does scatter a few X-rays, so that in a very long exposure, soft X-ray image, the moon may look as shown here. So this is the side of the moon, the day side of the moon that's being directly illuminated by the sun. This is the night side of the moon. So if we want to compare with what happens with the moon with what happens with this object, we have to compare the night side, because certainly this is the night side of this object. The sun is on the other side of it. Now, as we can see, there are a few X-rays being coming from the night side of the moon. But then let's look at the exposure. This image is the same as that, June 29, 1990. This is just in a different format. The exposure time is 1899 seconds, and that corresponds to 31 minutes and 39 seconds. So it took over 30 minutes for the moon to scatter these many X-ray photons from its night side. The exposure for this image is about 1 second. So it took this object about 1 second to emit these X-ray photons. So there's obviously no comparison. This is X-ray light emission. This is scattering of rays that were first emitted by the sun. And there are so few that it takes over 30 minutes for us to see that many. So obviously this object cannot be the moon. This is actually a star that has started emitting X-rays. It's not emitting as many as the sun. You can see how bright the sun is, but it has started emitting X-rays, which means that it has rejuvenated to the point that it is emitting visible light, because you'd expect a star to be able to emit visible light before X-rays, because the temperature needed to emit visible light is lower than the temperature needed to emit X-rays. So we certainly had these objects in the solar system by 2001. That image is irrefutable, evidence. We actually see other stellar cores in the sun's corona here. If you examine the circular outline of this, we can see that there's another one here, there's another one there, and these are certainly in the sun's corona because some of the corona is covering these objects. And you can see there's a darker portion of this particular one. So these are more of this system of objects. This was not even the only one. There were more in the sun's corona then. It looks like there may be another one there, a smaller one. Now, the Fatima dark sun of 1917 seems to have been caused by a light-emitting object eclipsing the sun, and this object had to therefore be a star. Because remember, a star emits light. Only a star can emit light. So this must have been a planet X or a stellar core that had by that time already rejuvenated. And this would mean that they may have started arriving more than 100 years ago. And then another sign that they may have been here before then, maybe since the last half of the 19th century, or since around 1850s, the appearance of noctilucent clouds, which were never observed until that time. It seems that the first time that these were ever observed was in 1850, but they started being observed in more frequently in 1885, 2 years after the Krakatoa volcano eruption. And these clouds are luminous clouds, usually blue in color, which form in the mesosphere or at about 80 or 50 miles in altitude. And they are only visible after the sun is below the horizon. Now, normal cloud altitude is between 9 and 14 kilometers, so about 5 miles in altitude, so much, much lower. But the mesosphere is actually part of the ionosphere. It's part of the lower ionosphere. And it has become obvious that these objects have greatly increased the ionization in the Earth's ionosphere. They do this because they have large magnetic fields, and they would induce more currents in the ionosphere. Also, they may be approaching the Earth at times. They have their own solar wind, their own stellar wind. They also produce coronal holes on the sun through the magnetic connections that they make. And the fast solar wind that comes out of these coronal holes affect our ionosphere. So our ionosphere is much more ionized, and this may have started happening when these objects first arrived in the solar system. So this may be an indication that this is when they arrived, so about 150 years ago. Now, it's also likely that in recent years some of the observed noctilucent clouds are in fact artificially created. And more recently, these artificial noctilucent clouds seem to have appeared in connection with rocket launches. And the reason for this seems to be to mask the Planet X objects, which have rejuvenated, are now very bright and colorful and more numerous because more and more of them are arriving. And so they are getting more difficult to hide than and with the usual methods like the sun, moon, and planet simulation system and chemtrails. So here we see this was what occurred right after the Japanese rocket launch. I didn't put here the time. It was in January of this year, 2018. But this is actually the rocket, and we can see behind it this cloud forming. Now, rockets, as we know, have been launched since the 1960s. And noctilucent clouds and shows like this have never been seen in association with rocket launches until recently. So it seems likely that this production of noctilucent clouds by the rocket or due to it spraying aerosols in order to mask the very colorful and bright rejuvenated Planet X system objects that may appear in the sky just after the sun has set, and that are now impossible to hide with the sun simulation system and chemtrails. But I don't have an image here, but if you look at some of the noctilucent clouds, they almost look like chemtrails. You see lines, you see what looks like a wave pattern with a certain wavelength, regular wavelength. And that to me is an association with chemtrails. It's like chemtrails at a very high altitude, possibly because they are spraying at that very high altitude, also in an effort to hide the system from the Earth's population. But this here is not only are they actually using a fake way of producing noctilucent clouds, they're actually telling people about it, so that in case they look at the sky and they see a strange sight, they will know that it's all due to the normal rocket launch. And I think actually that is just a cover story in order to hide objects. And in fact, this may actually be one of these objects, because we know they are very colorful. They emit magenta light, they may emit blue light, they may emit orange, yellow light, all kinds of colors that our sun has never emitted before. So it's very likely that they are producing this kind of show through the use of fake produced noctilucent clouds. So in conclusion, stars or stellar cores belonging to the Planet X system seem to have started arriving at the sun a little over 150 years ago. These objects seem to still be arriving and rejuvenating, with some having become so bright that it has caused the powers that be to resort to new ways of trying to mask their presence, such as the use of rockets, which produce fake noctilucent clouds. And you can see here the references if you are interested. I have made videos on all of these. This is Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X physicist. Thank you for watching.